Winterset in Summer Festival as a stop during their stay. Tour members were encouraged to read Bernice Morgan's Random Passage and Michael Crummey's Galore in preparation for their trip to Newfoundland and to Labrador. Joining me now are Craig Wally from Columbus, Ohio, and his wife Connie, and they're alongside one of their heroes, Michael Crummey, who joins me. Michael, of course, the award-winning writer of Galore. He won the Winterset Award in 2001 and Galore for River Thieves. Right. And Galore was shortlisted for the Dublin Impact Literary Award this year. Now, Craig, did your reading of Bernice's and Michael's book prepare you in any way for your trip to Newfoundland?
Well, I guess they helped. It's nice to see the physical surroundings to kind of put them into context, but it's what surprised me was the amazing amount of writing talent from this little place that most Americans couldn't find on a map.
Connie, were you prepared at all by reading the books?
Yes, I was. I certainly, physically, I think, although it was even more extreme, the rocks. I mean, obviously Newfoundland is known as the Rock, but I don't think I was prepared for exactly how rocky and how rugged the coastlines would be and how impossible it would be for me, at least, to come here with nothing in the early 1800s and have to make a life.
Michael, did you ever fancy that Galore would be used as a tourist enticement to get people down to Newfoundland?
Not so much. No, I mean it doesn't make the place look particularly appealing, Mac. Really, when you look at the content of the book. And I do remember our Lieutenant Governor John Crosby saying that he had read the book Galore and it was nowhere he recognized. And if he ever ended up there, he hoped someone would come and get him the hell out of it. So I'm a little surprised to think they gave this to people before they came here.
I think they're looking at the art that goes into the writing and giving them a sense of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a pretty. I was talking a little bit about this on the panel last night. Writing is such a private experience, and you're just sitting in your head for a couple of years. You know, when I was writing Galore. It was like a 2-year-long dream, and not even my wife really knew anything about this world that I was living in every day. So it's hard to imagine it out there in the world and to have people walking around in that little world that you spend so much time in alone, and to think of the places that it ends up going. You know, it's a pretty bizarre experience.
Craig, what made you take up the offer to come to Newfoundland and Labrador with classical tours?
Well, we were last summer at Classical Pursuits in Toronto. They have a week in Toronto of seminars, and we've gone to several. And I saw that Anne Kirkland, who's organized this group, a young lady from Toronto, was offering this as one of the travel tours they would do.
But you couldn't find it on a map. What attracted you?
Well, it's because of that, I think. And I bought Michael's book, fortunately, because it wasn't available in the States until the spring. And we decided, well, we read that, and if we liked it, we'd come. And
no pressure on the book.
No, and much more than we liked it. We loved it, and still do, having now read it at least twice. So it really made us want to see the place. And at that point, we didn't know we'd meet Michael, which was a bonus.
Was it anything like you expected?
Newfoundland?
Yeah.
I kept seeing so many parallels with Ireland, with which we're quite familiar, and there are certain parallels. I mean, obviously it was many Irish people settled here and brought their speech patterns, to some extent their way of life. But there's so many differences too, and I think what has amazed me more than anything else is the people who are such a mixture of creativity and hands-on ability. And I've said this to several people. I've met people who not only can write, read, think, talented people.
Dance, play musical instruments.
All that creative stuff.
Fish.
But it can also, can catch fish, mend anything, cars, can do so many things, physical things, besides the life of the mind.
Michael, what was it about Newfoundland and Labrador that you hoped to represent with your work, or
With this book in particular?
Yeah. Although you created a place,
Yeah.
and you were born out of here.
Yeah, and I was creating a fictional output, but with this book more than anything else I've written, I think I wanted to create a little vessel that I would pour everything I thought about Newfoundland into.
Well, we've only got 15 minutes, but I'm going to ask you, what do you think about Newfoundland?
Well, I've always been fascinated by, there was an old Newfoundland, and you still see vestiges of that, in the world today. But I had a sense that the world that, say, my parents grew up in, and the generation before them, was something that was unlike anything else the world had ever seen in a way. And so and particularly I was interested in the way that in those outpour communities, and you can still see this in some of the older people when you speak to them, it was like they lived between two worlds, and one was this incredibly dramatic physical landscape that they lived in, that was beautiful but often very dangerous. And the other was this kind of netherworld that they had created that had a lot of stuff brought over from the old countries, but also whatever superstitions and stories and foolishness that they came up with here. And to those people, it seemed like those worlds were equally real. Like, they didn't make a distinction and say, this is the real world and this is fanciful stuff we've made up. Those things affected their lives in the same way, and they saw them as equally real. And I was trying to recreate a sense of the world where, a ghost could live in the house up the road, and everybody just sort of accepted that as fact, and what did that mean then, or how they lived in the world, and what did that mean for the lives of those people. And so there was that side, and the other thing I think is that Newfoundlanders, in my experience, they're the best storytellers I've ever encountered anywhere in the world. And I wanted to write a book that was where I just pulled out all the stops and just told a story that entertained me. My only question when I was writing the book, when I was deciding what comes next, my only question was, does this entertain me? Is this interesting? And that was sort of, I just followed my nose with that through that. It's a book that covers a lot of ground, but I had no plan. I just sort of tried to entertain myself and then hope that translated.
A lot of blue sky involved.
No, there wasn't a whole lot of blue sky.
Not a blue sky thinking.
Craig and I were talking before we came on. He said this trip is called In Search of the Newfoundland Soul. He said it should have been called In Search of the Newfoundland Sun. And I think
writing a book, Craig? Are you? So you've come halfway across North America to meet Michael and to visit Eastport. What do you think?
I think, well, we were in Salvage yesterday for storytelling, and that really brought it home to me. We were in this little church that looked like it was built by boat builders, I think, and a little homey place, and filled with so much beauty, first physical beauty and talent, and so many people filling the church interested in it. I thought it was wonderful, and I think it's, like Michael says, this is a place where there's storytellers still, and there's hunger for it. And his book is wonderful in the literal sense, just full of wonders. And I found this place to be like that too.
Connie, are you pleased?
Yes, and I just wanted to comment on what Michael said about entertaining. There were so many parts of the book that I thought, well, this is such a great story. I'm sure he just put this in here because it's such a great story. But somehow it then got tied into the overall, the arc of the book. It wasn't just an isolated event somehow. I don't remember any stories that were just, oh, okay, you just put this in to entertain us, but maybe you did.
I really appreciate that comment, because I did want the book to be a whole. So, and there were lots of times where I put something in without any idea how it was going to play into, but they were like threads that I wanted to carry through the whole text of the book, so I'm really glad to hear that worked for you on that level.
The whole book that was, the boat that was galore that just sent out to sail.
Yeah.
Now, I've been asking the writers as they come in today and yesterday, Michael, what they've read recently and really enjoyed, that they would recommend to others to read. Now, I know that Connie and Craig would nominate galore, but what have you read recently that's really stuck with you and say, you got to read this book?
Boy, I'm terrible at this game.
Right.
Because I forget everything I read. Just after I read, I should have a list.
Got an article that you've read recently?
Well, one of the books that came up last night, and it was a book that I reread recently, is The Grey Islands by John Steffler, which I think is it's a masterpiece. And I read that when I was in university. And I remember I wrote a little book called Hard Light, which came out in '98, which I think The Grey Islands was a huge influence on that. Like, Hard Light would not exist, I don't think, without the influence of The Grey Islands. And it was reissued, I think, within the last 4 or 5 years, and I got my hands on it again. And it's just a terrific book, and it's one of those books that captures something about Newfoundland. It really gets something that very few other books have gotten to, I think. And it's hilariously funny, really moving, and unlike anything else I've ever read. So I would definitely recommend that, certainly to people from away who are just starting to read Newfoundland material. That's one place they should definitely go. And anybody from here who hasn't read it should really get their hands on it, I think.
Or The Afterlife of George Cartwright.
That's also a terrific book, his novel. Yeah,
I love that book.
Great writer.
Well, thank you all for coming in this morning. Greg and Wally and Connie and Michael for talking about galore, talking about coming to Newfoundland on the literary tour and coming to Winterset and enjoying the festival. We have some music now.